A White Stone by Jim and Mary Corbett. Chapter 27. From our Father's heart. My wrath is soon to break forth upon your land. There will be no place to hide for those who have not heard my call to holiness. But fear not. Those who know me, who have learned to be locked up with me, will rise above the darkest places. I will have my bride. The world will see and notice the redemptive power of the cross. They will be astonished as I bring forth the beauty of life from the ashes. My word will go forth. My plans will be accomplished. My people will be vessels of honor to me. Be of great courage. Be steadfast. Lock yourselves up with me and live. End of From Our Father's Heart reading. Greater love has no one than this, that he lay down his life for his friends. John 15:13, NIV. It was a rainy day in the city. Tommy Bracken sat in the window seat of Red Carlson's bus, watching the rain pelt against the window on the way to his first day of school at Thomas Jefferson Middle School on Malvina Street. Red had been led by the Lord to sell his home in order to buy several buses, now used to transport children back and forth through rough neighborhoods, so they wouldn't be hurt on their way to or going home from school. Originally, Red had been transporting to and from a Christian school, but the Lord saw fit to expand his ministry, as Red would say it with that ever-present gleam in his eye. Kids who ain't Christians need to see someone who cares. When I pick 'em up for free, no strings attached, they and their parents see Jesus. And you know what? He said, as a mischievous grin crossed his freckled face. To them, Jesus looks just like me. I might be his only representative in their lives. Wow, what an honor. Tom and Sally furnished the upper floors of the building they had purchased as a safe place for people who wanted to be delivered from alcohol or drugs or bondages of any kind. On the first and second floors, a free walk-in clinic was established for anyone who had need. The purchase and operation of it exhausted the money they had acquired from the sale of their home and personal effects. Carlisle Henderson, Tom's former employer, had decided to sell his business and donated the profits to Tom and Sally to use wisely. Within weeks of the sale, he disappeared, and no one had heard from him since. The money purchased and renovated the abandoned hospital 2 blocks away. Love, care, hope, and especially answers in Jesus were part of every prescription. And there was always an open door for the healer of mankind to perform his wonders on those deemed medically hopeless. Many bodies were supernaturally restored to continue to testify of the power of the cross and its effect on believers. If and when the Lord chose to intervene, many believers were able to continue their missions unaffected or miraculously healed when exposed to chemical and germ warfare. Deadly poisons simply didn't have any adverse effect as God protected them. As the family, now somewhat acclimated to their new surroundings, began finding their ministry base, Becky acted on a desire to work in the clinics and hospital, while Tommy felt he should concentrate his ministry in the schools to work with the street gangs so prevalent in the area. The social programs, political rhetoric, and even local government and law enforcement were no match for the pressure put on the young by local gang mentality. Too often, the motto of the rebels, join or die, became a reality in the life of someone who attempted to stand alone. Through the Holy Spirit, Tommy saw through the exterior of gang toughs into their souls and saw the need only Jesus could fill. As the bus pulled into the school, Tommy said a silent prayer. Lord, I remember you told me that if I would go, you would be with me and make my life significant. Here I am, Lord. Use me. Well, looky here. A brand new pile of dog just got off the bus. A voice came from the side as Tommy's foot touched the pavement. As Tommy turned in the direction of the voice, a pain overcame him, an excruciating pain just before things got fuzzy. Tommy found himself flat on his back near the front wheel of the bus, blood spurting from his nose all over his shirt. Instantly, Red Carlson bounded from the driver's seat and lunged at Waco, the kid who threw the punch, and pulled him into the now empty bus, closing the door behind them and leaving Tommy and the startled gang members outside. As Tommy realized what was happening and recovered enough to get to his feet, he could see through the bus door windows that Waco was on the floor with Red's knee on his chest, holding him down. Everyone was so caught off guard by Red's reaction that for an instant, Waco's gang members, the rest of the kids on the playground, and even Waco, Red, and Tommy were frozen in place in utter silence. Finally, Tommy said the first words. "Come on, Red, open the doors. He's just trying to be tough. Let him go." With a kindly grin, Red removed his knee from Waco's chest. Before he was completely set free, Waco was stopped by the doors that were still held shut by his captor. Quietly, Red spoke to his agitated, unwilling audience, and his words greatly impacted the spirit of his startled captive. "Young man, should anything like this happen again to Tommy Bracken, this bus, me, or any of Tommy's friends, I will pray that the powers of heaven come against you to bring you to your knees. I'd suggest you make it your life's work to protect that young man," he said, nodding toward Tommy, "or your life won't be worth the 27 cents you have in your pocket. Do you understand what I mean?" "Yes, sir," was all that would come out of Waco's mouth. "One other thing," Red added, "within that boy, again nodding in Tommy's direction, is more power than you've ever dreamed of in your entire life. I'd find out what it is if I were you." Having said that, he opened the bus doors. Waco bounded from the bus and walked past Tommy without even looking in his direction. His gang, the rebels, followed obediently behind him. Waco's only response to their questioning of what should be done was, "Leave him alone. We've got better things to do." Without anyone realizing it, the Lord, through the heavenly warriors in the bus and on the playground, had established Tommy as a quiet leader in the school. Waco thought he ran the school and had attempted to establish that authority the instant Tommy stepped from the bus. But God had other plans for the souls of his precious children who were held in the bondage of fear. Tommy was to be found faithful as a strong, bright light testifying of Jesus. He was given the grace gift of agape love for his fellow man. Motivated by it and caring only for others, he allowed them to see Christ. He loved the unlovable and always had time to help the hurting. He then discipled them until they were able to show that same Jesus to others. Most newcomers would try to infiltrate the most popular group of kids in the school, but that's not what Tommy did. He sought out the lonely, the outcast, or the helpless and befriended them. One instance of the miracle power of love was visible in Larry Stern. Larry was born without the full use of his left side. His left arm was dwarfed and looked approximately half the size of his right arm. He always had pain in his left leg, so he favored it. When he walked, he gave the appearance of a crippled bird. The kids, in their evil ignorance and need for importance, gave Larry the name Bird Claw and would taunt him unmercifully at every opportunity. One afternoon lunch period, when the outdoor games had run out and boredom had set in, a majority of the class had congregated in an area next to the front steps of the school. The guys were demonstrating their bravado by arm wrestling, and the girls were standing around giggling, posing, and spurring them on. Larry and Tommy had been catching up on some homework in an area near the back end of the school, and upon completing their assignments, they walked to the front of the school to wait for the bell that signaled the start of their afternoon classes. In these waiting times, they would often discuss the things of God and what His purpose might be for their lives. Larry had given his life to Jesus several months before and had been healed of the anger and hurt caused by the ridicule he had faced throughout his life. On a frequent basis, they would study the life of Jesus and how he glorified the Father with every action he took, and then discuss how they could adapt what they learned to everyday life. Often Larry would pray to be like Jesus to those who needed to see a strength they themselves didn't have. Larry and Tommy even went so far as to invent scenarios and then dig into the Word to see how Jesus would likely handle a given situation based on what they studied. This proved to be an endeavor well worth their time, as the Lord honored their efforts and developed His character in them as they diligently sought Him. The more they continued this practice, the easier it got to know what to do in real life. The pair had just seated themselves at the bottom of the steps when Tony, the most insecure and therefore the loudest of the group, noticed they had arrived. "Hey, Larry!" Tony yelled in their direction. Some of the crowd tried to restrain him, but hatred and need for approval compelled him to ignore them. "Hey, Birdclaw, I'm talking to you," he seethed as he walked over to the steps. Larry and Tommy were praying silently. "Since you've been hanging around with Loco here, you've gotten even uglier than you were before." Tony turned in Waco's direction and received a nod of approval, which gave him even more false bravado. "What do you say? You and the cripple do a little arm wrestling? You got one good arm and he may not have legs that work, but he should be able to arm wrestle. Why don't the two of you go at it?" The so-called cripple was Nicky White, a very active gang member until a bullet severed his spinal column and left him paralyzed from the waist down. Now he lived in a sea of anger and festering hatred. And because the rest of the gang just tolerated him now unless they could somehow use him, he was the most dangerous. He no longer belonged anywhere and hovered at the perimeter of everything. This last jibe made him furious. To be identified with the bird claw was the highest insult Tony had ever paid him. "I ain't gonna fight him." "He's freaky," Nicky screamed. "Why not?" Tony goaded him. "You guys could be the fight of the century." The laughter of the crowd puffed Tony up even more. "What about you, Claw?" He confronted Larry, who was calmly observing the situation. The two children of God had waited in prayer for everything to unfold. Too often they had seen the heart of a hero rise up in very ordinary people when empowered by God. They were not going to miss this opportunity by taking anything on in their own strength. Taking his eyes off Tony for the moment, Larry looked at Tommy, who had a definite grin on his face. It probably seemed inappropriate to anyone else who may have looked in his direction, but Larry caught its significance, and Tommy gave him a go-ahead nod. So Larry hobbled over to Nicky, who was fuming over the embarrassment of his current situation, hatred toward the Claw oozing from every pore. As Larry approached him, he growled in a low, determined voice. "I ain't gonna fight no freak." "I know," Larry said with a smile. "You couldn't gain anything by beating me because anyone could beat me. However, there is a war that's already been won for you on a cross about 2,000 years ago. So, in the name of Jesus of Nazareth, get up and walk." With that, Larry extended his good arm to Nicky, who stared at him in utter disbelief. Slowly, and somewhat reluctantly, Nicky felt compelled to reach out and grasp the extended arm. As soon as he did, the strength he needed to stand was released. A collective gasp from the crowd broke the silence as Nicky rose from his wheelchair. He simply stood and stared questioningly into Larry's eyes. "Go ahead, walk," Larry encouraged him. So he did, and within days he was running and jumping and completely whole. Over the coming weeks, Nicky inquired about the power that healed him. In doing so, Larry had the opportunity to show him his best friend, Jesus. The new heart that came with his salvation would soon lead him to lay his life down while attempting to rescue a small child from a burning building. He was running in for the third time when an explosion rained debris on him, killing him instantly. Larry never experienced that kind of healing miracle in his own life. He may not have been healed physically, but he did have the miracle of new life and friendship. Because of God's love through Tommy, seeds of greater love would grow and be given to many. Through Tommy, at times, even the most hardened heart saw the love that took Jesus to the cross and surrendered to it. One Thursday, Waco's gang, the rebels, decided to settle the long and bitter battle for the 3rd Street turf once and for all. The Falcons were determined to hold on, even though most of the time the turf was occupied by the rebels. As hostilities grew, everyone knew that it was just a matter of time before it would come to this. The time had been set for 6 p.m. Each side had laid out its strategy. The rules were simple. There were none. The only guidelines were that it was going to be face-to-face. No hiding, no cars, simple weapons, head-on, until one gang backed off and ran. Tommy, seeing the stupidity of all of this, tried to talk to Waco even days before the fight. "You're loco," Waco responded to his pleas. "You and your Jesus can go to hell. Leave me alone." Tommy spent most of Wednesday night praying for God to intervene somehow. Hours at a time, he wept for the souls of the boys on both sides. "Somehow, let them see you, Jesus, before it's too late for them," Tommy cried. The next morning he headed to the school. "It's an ambush," Sarah Felding said with tears in her eyes. "Tommy, it's an ambush to waste Waco. They're gonna kill him and then there won't be any fights no more," Rick Bellows told me. "You gotta do something." With that, Tommy took off in a dead run across the open field that led to the vacant lot on the corner of 3rd and White Oak. The site had been chosen so all who lived there could witness who won, and there would be no more dispute. He headed for the alley behind Cooley's Groceries, where the rebels were meeting before going to the fight. Tommy arrived at the same time Waco did. When he saw Tommy, his anger flared. "What are you doing here, you? Get out of my face before I kill you myself!" Waco fumed. He picked up a piece of pipe that was lying near the steps that led to the back door of the grocery store. I said, "Get out of here, freak. Praying ain't gonna do." Tommy, noticing a speeding car rounding the corner behind Waco, ran toward the intended victim. A gunshot was heard at the precise moment that Waco was pushed to the side. The bullet ripped into Tommy's chest, throwing him heavily against the wall of the building. Waco turned and saw the car speeding away. Mesmerized for a moment, he could only stare as blood gushed from Tommy's chest, soaking his shirt. By the time Waco came to his senses, one of the rebels had already taken Tommy into his arms and was sitting with him against the building. "Why'd you do it, you stupid idiot? That was for me. Why'd you do it?" he said, screaming with tears in his eyes. Tommy looked up weakly at the person who had hated him, blood now coming from his nose and the side of his mouth. "Because if you die now," he said, choking on his own blood, "if you die now, you'll burn in hell for eternity, and Jesus doesn't want that." Tommy coughed and then went silent. Forever. Waco gaped at his still bloodied body. The pipe he was going to use on this freak was still in his hand. As he became aware again of what he was holding, he let the pipe fall to the ground and slowly walked away. The sun was bright, and the morning mist had just dissipated in the old cemetery yard. Quiet conversation could be heard between sobs as the medium-sized wooden casket was gently lowered into the ground. The Brackens, aching at their loss but knowing that Tommy was simply on loan from God, were enveloped in a quiet inner peace and hung on to the fact that they would one day be reunited. Waco sat behind a tombstone in a far corner of the cemetery. He had been there all night, needing answers to questions he had never asked before. In Tommy, Waco had seen a strength that he had never experienced. The weakness of that kind of love had always made him angry for some reason. How could weakness be so strong? He asked himself over and over. It all made him sick to his stomach. Prior to everyone's arrival for Tommy's burial service, a lone old man came out of the morning shadows. He walked right up to the startled youth and spoke gently. "The answer is Jesus. Tommy has gone to be with him, but you are here to do the work that's left. Go to Jesus. He loves and forgives you." With that, the man turned and walked back into the shadows. Waco rested his head on his knees and called out to the one who Tommy loved most. In future weeks, the love of God would spread hotter than the hate of the street and stronger than any war through Waco. Jesus had been glorified through Tommy, and many would know of a love far more valuable than any turf could ever be. End of chapter 27.